Good morning, everyone. Kristen Hunt is joining us on Zoom, and I am worried about the technology here, but we will see how we do. So we are so happy and excited to have Sally Allison present today, the last of our spiritual journeys for the month of November. So Sally Allison is a longtime member of DUPC. She began attending in 1992. Got that just right. He thought. And she was originally from the Harrisburg, Hershey area, graduated from Indiana University of Pennsylvania with a BA in Fine Arts and a minor in Technical Theater. She loves all things that are creative and is a proud member of the IATSE Local 858, the Wardrobe Union. Today, she's working on a final performance of Moulin Rouge, and so she will need to leave at 10:45 sharp, as her supervisor has graciously allowed her to be late for the 10:30 call. Sally, let's see if we can do this.
Okay. Now, as long as I can figure out, tell me when you're in the slideshow. Good morning, everyone. As David said, I am Sally, and this is my spiritual journey, and I subtitled it Held by God's Love. So I was born on August 17th, 1962. This is a picture of my sister Susan holding me as a baby. And down in the corner over there, you can see the family that I was born into: my mom, my dad, my 9-year-old sister Susan, and my 6-year-old brother John. So I was definitely the baby of the family, sort of a mistake or an accident. I was actually born during Vacation Bible School. My sister and brother have told me that they remember being told at Vacation Bible School that they had a little sister. And I was also born in a family where if the church doors were open, we were there. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a little bit. Oops. Okay. Now I got it. So this is my first baptism, and I'll tell you more about that too later in a little bit. So I thought that I kind of always had this idea in my head that I was born into the United Methodist Church. Actually, I wasn't. I was born into the Evangelical United Brethren Church. And because that's what it was at that point in time. And so what it was that in Ono, which is a town of, I always say, like 162 people, it's very small. There were 2 churches. There was the Salem Evangelical Church and then the Memorial United Brethren Church. And they joined together and became the Evangelical United Brethren Church. And then in 1965, they merged to form the Ono Evangelical Brethren Church. And then in 1968, they became Methodists. So this picture here is my grandparents, my father's parents. My grandfather was did a lot of stuff in the church, just as my father did. But these are the 2 bells that are outside of the current Ono United Methodist Church. This is probably from the bigger church that I remember going to, and unfortunately, I could not find a picture of that church. And this is the smaller bell. But both of those buildings stood for a very long time when I was growing up. And in fact, the smaller building we used as a youth hangout for a while. So I come from a long line of people involved in church. And not working. I think you have to be in the slideshow. You can't be on Zoom. So their names were Alma and Claire Allison. Okay. All right. So, um, this is the current Ono United Methodist Church on the top there. The window, the stained glass window there was from the old church that I grew up in as a very young child. And they actually took it out of that church when they tore it down to build an addition, that big 2-story addition on the side, saved it for a long time, and then finally put it in the narthex of their church. But this is my family. This is a church directory picture, which you probably all can recognize. And I, like I said, if the church doors were open, we were there. So that meant that there was Sunday school, there was worship service, there was a Sunday evening service, there was Wednesday prayer meeting, there was yearly vacation Bible school, yearly evangelistic services, youth retreats, children retreats. There was a lot. And yeah, probably in the church at least 3 times a week, if not more, but almost always 3 times a week. And one of my best friends in high school, her father was a Billy Graham evangelist. And yes, we would have yearly evangelistic services. So, okay, I'm ready to advance. Oh, I'll do it, I think. Okay. So the one thing that as I was putting this presentation together, that I was thinking about was what it was like when I was a little kid. And so the Sunday school was in the basement of the church. My kindergarten and first grade teacher was the pastor's wife. And this is a song that she had. It may be a song that she made up, because I couldn't find it on the web, anywhere on the internet. So you can see over here, there's all these things that, and to be fair, there was also a verse that was, let's meet a boy who is a Christian. So it wasn't just girls, but how does she live each day? And all these things, basically 10 commandment things she does not do. No, no, no. And this is how the song goes. And what does she do? Reads her Bible, behaves in church, makes time to pray, obeys her parents. So I knew from my growing up years that God is love and God loves me, but I think there was an underlying feeling for me. And I don't think it was an overt message from the church that I went to, from my family, but that God's love might be conditional. And that could be because I'm sort of a perfectionist, and also wanted to be a good little girl, because in the 60s, that's what you were when you were a little girl. You had to be a good little girl. So there was just this feeling in me that maybe God's love was conditional, and I had to do certain things to make sure that I could maintain God's love. So this is my second baptism, which Lori will tell you is probably theologically verboten. When I was about 11 years old, we were in church one Sunday, and I asked my parents, why can't I take communion? Because all the adults would take communion, but none of the kids would. And so they said, well, that's a good question. Why don't you ask the pastor? So we went up and asked the pastor. And I guess he just decided that, yeah, you're a human, you should be able to take communion too. So I don't exactly remember if it was that I needed to join the church or whatever, but I was baptized a second time, and I was baptized in the Swatara Creek, which is cold, on I think a Sunday afternoon. And so that's why the church part of the baptismal certificate is crossed out, because I wasn't baptized in a church this time. And the reason that they did it was because my mother couldn't find my baptismal certificate that I actually have now. And my brother and sister were dedicated, which meant they weren't actually baptized as babies. They were just blessed. And I was actually baptized. So I was baptized a second time. So I was a little bit, I guess, maybe of a pusher, a rebel then, because I was the one to ask the question, like, why can I take communion? I should be able to take communion too. So then as I got older, in my teen years, has anybody ever done lay witness mission? No. Okay. So I think I was a young teen when our church did a lay witness mission, and you can see the schedule there. It's a little hard to read, but a coordinator gathers some people, a team that he wants to bring to the church. They're from other churches, might be from states away. And they come on a Friday night, they stay with hosts in the host church. And then there's events on Saturday, and then Sunday there's a wrap up. And Reverend Ben Johnson is the man who kind of developed the whole idea. And what it was is laymen sharing with fellow laymen the reality of Christ in their life. And this might seem a little like, wow, kind of pushy evangelical righty to some folks, but it really was a very joyous event. And I actually ended up going on lay witness missions to other churches as a team member, as a youth, because they would also have a youth group, they would have a children's group. I mean, it was all inclusive. On Saturday mornings, they'd have breakfasts at a few of the hosts' homes, and it would be a lot about prayer. But it was just basically a way to kind of help create more of a church community, and also help people become more committed to their Christian life. And I went to a lay witness mission in Massachusetts, which was a lot of fun. And it really was, we sang, it was a lot of fun. And I really did enjoy it a lot. I wished at that time that I would have some exciting conversion story, because some of the people that would go to lay witness missions would have exciting conversion stories like, oh, they were so bad, and then all of a sudden something happened. I never had that. I was born into the church, basically. So that was always kind of one of my regrets, that I didn't have this big story to tell. But now I have a story to tell, I guess, because I'm here. So in my later high school years, I had an English project that I had to create a survey. You could survey people about anything you wanted to survey them about. Excuse me. Then you had to conduct the survey with at least 10 or more people, 10 people, and then write about the results. So my topic was, what do you think happens when we die? And I asked a bunch of different people. I mean, a lot of the people in my life were Christians, and so they gave, pretty much the standard Christian answer: you go to heaven or you go to hell, and this is what happens. And when I asked my sister, she said that she thought, or she hoped, that no one would go to hell, and that everybody would wind up in heaven somehow. And that always stayed with me as I went through my life, as I continue to go through my life. That idea has stayed with me. So I'll just let you sit with that and think about it. And then I left home. So just to let you know that where I grew up was incredibly homogenous, very white, very Protestant. I had on my father's side of the family, I had Catholic cousins, because his oldest sister married into the Catholic Church, and that was sort of a big deal at the time. But I really didn't know anybody else who was Catholic until I went to high school. And then I found out, oh, there's kids in my high school that are Catholic. I didn't know that. Wow. I didn't know any Jewish people. I didn't know people of any ethnicity, really. There was one girl in my elementary school for about a year who was a person of color, and she was with a missionary family. So it was a very very homogenous community. So I went to college, and when I was looking at colleges, I could have gone to Messiah College, which is a small Christian college in Pennsylvania. It's about 45 minutes from my home, where I grew up. And it's small, not big at all. And I think my mother was really hoping that I would go there because I could stay close to home. I ended up going to Indiana University of Pennsylvania, which was 4 hours away from home, which I think was probably one of the better decisions I made in my life because it allowed me to grow and flourish. IUP at the time, I think, had about 12,000 students. And so when I got to college, I got to be part of this program where you could go to church. Maybe, I'm not even sure if it was just this church. It was Grace United Methodist Church in Indiana, Pennsylvania. That's this building right here. But they had a thing where a family would sponsor you. So a family in Indiana would take you in and kind of treat you like family away from home, invite you out to lunch, take you to dinner, be there for you. My family was the pastor of the church and his wife. So you'll see this a lot, that I end up with hanging out with pastors. My junior year of college, I lived in the Christian House, which is this picture in the top over here. That's the group of kids. I think it was 3 floors, men and women. And it was a place where we would have services at different times. It was, again, very supportive. And people were all along the continuum of the Christian faith. This was a place where I met a man who was very learned, a huge Bible scholar, and would read theological texts at night driving on the turnpike. He was the only one in the car. Now, how he did this, I don't know. But one of the people that was in the Christian House, a friend of mine named Camille Hallstrom, is a minister now. She's a reverend, and was also in the theater. And I had known her because I didn't go initially to college to do theater, but this is Waller Hall. This is Waller Hall, what it looks like today, kind of what it looked like then, except for this whole part over here that you really can't see. But the theater program was fairly new. Waller Hall was the old girls' gymnasium. And so when I was in school, it really still was very much a gymnasium, and we just made it work. But Camille was in the theater as well. And I always love the fact that, so we're friends on Facebook now. She's a minister. She's also incredibly scholarly, knows lots of stuff. When we did some competition one night where they asked you to kind of list the books of the Bible in chronological order. So not in biblical book order, but like what came before what. She was the one who did it the best. She's my Facebook friend. Another friend from the theater, Greg Giovanni, is also a Facebook friend of mine. They are Facebook friends with each other. Camille is, as I said, very scholarly, a minister. Greg was our crazy, wild, extremely overtly gay, would dress in wild clothing and be completely wild in college. But we're all still friends, and I love that. So after college, just trying to see if I wrote anything else. After college, I moved back home to Pennsylvania for a couple of years. And at the time, there wasn't a very big young adult fellowship in my church. So I ended up going to the Hershey Free Church, Evangelical Free Church, which had a really nice youth group. And I didn't go to their worship services very often, but I went to this youth group quite a bit. And it was really young adults. And they had a very nice program. I wasn't really into like changing memberships or anything like that, but it was a nice group of people to hang out with. And of course, the Evangelical Free Church is probably more to the right of some churches. But that wasn't really my focus at the time. It was really to have that community. However, the Hershey Evangelical Free Church evidently had new people or had some connection to the Second Evangelical Free Church in Brooklyn, New York. This church was originally a Norwegian church. So what happened was a group of us from the Hershey Free Church did a mission trip to the Second Evangelical Free Church in Brooklyn, slept in the basement of the church, and went around for 2 or 3 days to the surrounding neighborhood, knocking on doors and doing evangelism, which as an introvert is heckin' scary. But we did it. And so it was really an experience. And I also did it partly because I was going to move to New York and go to school at the Studio and Form of Scenic Design, which was in Manhattan. I knew I was not going to be able to afford Manhattan. I was going to live with a friend of mine in Brooklyn. That soon before I moved fell through. So I ended up, because I had made this connection, staying with the youth pastor and his wife, Marshall and Lori. Don't ask me their last names, but their cats are Minnie and Tilly. As you can tell, where I kind of focused my memory. I stayed in their house for 2 weeks. And then I stayed with the head pastor of the church. So they lived in an apartment right about there. And then the pastor of the church lived in the house that was over on this street, pretty much right next to the church. Lived with them for a few months, was really looking for a place of my own. Through a connection through this church, found a Hasidic Jewish man who was a property owner and went to see him, which was very intimidating. And he said, well, basically any property, you don't qualify for assistance or anything like that. Basically any property, you're not going to be able to afford it. But I have a room in my basement and you can rent it from me for $250 a month. And I was like, okay, cool. So for about 6 months, 8 months, I lived in the basement of a Hasidic Jewish family, several blocks away from the church. And I didn't have a great deal of interaction with them. They did have a young daughter who was about 15 or 16 at the time. She met my parents, my parents came to visit me. She saw them in the driveway and she never spoke to me, but she said to them something about, is there something wrong with your daughter? And I was about 24 at the time. And they said, no, why? And she's like, well, she's not married. Because in the Hasidic Jewish culture, they get married at about 16. So she really wondered why I was not married. But it was actually a lovely experience, even though I really didn't have much interaction with them. And it was a basement apartment that was really a basement apartment. And it was a little scary at times. But it was really a great experience. At Christmas time, I went to a Hasidic candy store, a Jewish candy store that was all kosher, bought candy and left it for them for the new year. And didn't say anything, just left it downstairs because they would come down to do their laundry. Went home to my home in PA. And when I came back, they had taken the candy and they left me a necklace. So it was a very nice experience. And from that apartment, I moved into an apartment with the pastor's daughter. She was one of 2 roommates. So it was a very eye-opening experience, college and living in New York City and Brooklyn. I had friends that were from India, good friends that were from India. When I was in college in the theater, as you may expect, there were a lot of LGBT folks. And that was the first time I had ever experienced LGBT folks. It was probably the first time in college that I'd ever met somebody who was Jewish, or like really met them as opposed to just seeing them somewhere. So when you meet and befriend a wide range of people, your world expands, and make someone the other is a lot harder. And I think that was one of the big things that I learned through all of that experience of my time, was just that people are people. And once you get to know them and you're in their homes, they're people like you. And so that was kind of like each section of this, I kind of have things that I've taken away from it. And when I was living in Brooklyn, one of the people that I knew, one of the Indian men that I knew, was good friends with a Chinese man, Chinese American. And we became boyfriend and girlfriend. And he was going to RIT at the time. And so I moved to Rochester to be closer to him because he was going to RIT. It was a big move, quite a difference from Brooklyn, New York to Rochester. I was actually scared of Rochester downtown. Okay, living in New York, I rode the subways at 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning. I was in New York in the late 80s when Times Square was not cleaned up yet. But Rochester scared me because everything closed down and it seemed, less people, and it just felt scarier for some reason. Anyway, I again connected myself with a church, the Genesee Valley United Methodist Church in Henrietta. It doesn't exist anymore. I think it's a covenant church now. And my marriage to Peter, we did get married, didn't last very long. But it's what brought me to Rochester. And so in 1992, I had moved out, was living on my own, and I was looking for churches. The church in Henrietta was kind of far. And so I started to do some church shopping. And I went to the Brighton Church, which at the time was very, very evangelical, right? More right than I wanted, obviously. And then I went to the Asbury United Methodist Church, and I know that this is supposedly not the case, but it didn't feel churchy enough to me. There wasn't, the Sunday I was there was no real focus on Jesus and the Bible. And so I was like, okay. And then I saw an article in the paper, and I wish I could have found the article, but I wasn't able to. I found the article from the Democrat and Chronicle about Janie Spar, who was being called as an out lesbian minister. And at the time, because I was going through a divorce, I was feeling kind of less than. Now, I grew up as a good girl who was supposed to do everything right. And my parents, of course, didn't want me to get divorced. But I did. And I just was feeling like I don't fit in. I don't fit into places where there's lots of, like, the emphasis is entirely on family. I don't have that. And so I thought, well, if this is a church that accepts an out lesbian person, then I bet they'll be accepting of me. And so I ended up here. And I joined the church, I think it says 1992 or 93. And you can see that all 4 pastors at the time signed it. It's the Ruchudis and Gail and Alfreda. And so I became an elder. I was on session when session meetings were 30 some people and went past midnight. And I really enjoyed this church. I had close female friends. We went to a Presbyterian women's gathering in Louisville, and Janie was there, which was really exciting and fun. And we also went to one before that in Iowa. So I got to be around these people who were personing the issue and wanting to person the issue and wanting to do that. And that was very encouraging and felt really important to me to do that sort of work. And so I was here for 9 years in Rochester. When I first moved here in 1989, I hated Rochester. I moved here in January, which is a really bad time to move to Rochester without a car. And so I had to take the bus. And I hated it. And I was so ready to leave. And my husband, Peter, and I at the time got a job with IBM and we stayed, or Xerox, and we stayed here. And I got involved in Jiva Theater, and that made the world a better place. So after we were divorced, I stayed here and met my second husband, Lynn Stork, and we worked at Jiva together. That's where we met. And then in 1998, we moved to Washington, D.C., or we moved to Maryland. And the first place that we moved to was Laurel, Maryland. And so once again, I went church shopping and I saw that the Laurel Presbyterian Church was really close to the apartment that we lived in. And so I went there the first Sunday, and there was a quote on the bulletin from Chris Glasser. And I thought, I know that name. And I thought, I think I'm in the right place. And I was. So this is the minister. Whoops, wrong one. Reverend Paul Anderson. Very wonderful man. Also a closeted gay minister. Lived with his partner. And I am convinced that there was a portion of the church that knew that he was gay and that they were a couple, but there was a larger portion of the church that either didn't know or didn't want to know. And of course, this was pre being able to be an out minister, an out LGBT minister in the Presbyterian Church. And it was just one of those feelings that I had that was like, how sad to have to not be yourself. We lived in Laurel for about 8 months. We moved to Bowie, Maryland, which is about 20-minute drive south. And we had our kids, Ray and Link. And I did go to the Reformed Presbyterian Church in Bowie. Okay, it was just down the street from my house. And I liked them, and I went to one of their Monday Bible study groups and went a couple of times. And I'd say about the second or third time, a discussion started and people started talking about very negatively about abortion rights. And I was like, nope, I'm not in the right place. So I didn't always get to Laurel every Sunday because it was a little bit of a drive, and I had one and then 2 kids who were little. And but we did have them baptized there. So Ray and Link were baptized at the Laurel Church. I wish I could remember this woman's name. She was wonderful. She was sort of like the Vera Pally of that church. Just a saint. She was very sweet. And she was one of the people that stuck with us. And I was when the kids were baptized. And actually, both of our families came down when they were baptized. So it was really nice. I was hoping that her name was going to be on their baptismal certificates, but it wasn't, because I really wanted to have that. But it wasn't there. And I don't have a good memory anymore. So this is one of the things that I kind of took away from my time down in Maryland. How hard is it to have to hide who you are? And no matter the reason, not to be able to be you hurts, has to hurt. When people were talking about abortion rights in that Bible study, I couldn't speak up. I couldn't say anything. I had to mask. The pastor at my church was masking. Chris Glasser actually came and did a retreat at the Laurel Church that I went to, which was awesome. And I believe it was about prayer mostly. He did speak a little bit about LGBTQ things, but the church, there were people in that church who I think were just not ready. They weren't necessarily anti, but they were just not ready. And they were not ready to recognize that the man who led their church, who was really wonderful and did so much for their community, was living with his partner. So that, and I also, at the time when I had my kids, I suffered from anxiety and depression. I suffered from postpartum depression. There's a lot of masking that goes on with depression and anxiety. So that's kind of one of the things that struck me at the time, or that strikes me now as I look back, probably is more the case. And then we moved back to Rochester. So we were in Maryland for 4 years. And so in 2004, we moved back to Rochester. And one of the reasons that I was willing to move back to Rochester, even though Maryland tends to be more mild, is because of this church and theater. Because I still had the connection with the union at the time. I wasn't a union member at that point in time, but I had done some work with them. And so those were two of the things that I said, yeah, okay, we can move back to Rochester. That's all right. So we did with our 2 kids. And I promptly got involved in the church again. And so here are a whole bunch of different things that I've done. And you can read them for yourself. And I have to say that, you know, most of these jobs have been very fulfilling, and I've really enjoyed them, all of them. I am an artist. I am an artist by heart. And so I love painting. I painted one of the offices downstairs. I think it's been repainted since then. I painted a couple of other things in the church. I come from a technical theater background, so coordinating like the wedding facilities coordinator and the Christmas Eve coordinator, it's sort of like being a stage manager, because they're all live events and they all have things that are supposed to go in order. So it's the bulletin board. Yeah. So I love doing this stuff. I love doing the newsletter. It's an incredible creative outlet for me. I took a class online for Publisher and figured out how to do Publisher to at least a basic level or decent level. And so I just really enjoy it. Thrills me. So I was asked again to be an elder and serve on session. And the person that asked me was Vera Pally. I can still remember her calling me up and saying, so you're an elder from back when you were here before. Would you be interested in serving on session again? So I've served on session a lot. And so from this period of my life, the second move back to Rochester, I was trying to think, so what kind of ties these last 20 years together, 19, 20 years? And I realized that in so many cases, it was that God provides. Oftentimes, finances were tight, and I would think, what am I going to do? I'm the financial person in my house. My father was the business manager of our school district, and so did lots of finance. He taught me well, so I take care of the finances. So if things were short, I would be like, what are we going to do? And somehow something would happen. Or I wanted to have some work, and the wedding facilities coordinator job came up because Gordon had just retired or left DUPC, and so it was just Pat as the pastor at the time, and she was feeling overwhelmed. They were feeling overwhelmed with a lot of different things. And they said, one of the things is weddings, and we have to figure out what we're going to do. And I said, well, I think I could do that job. And she's like, I said, I'll try it and see how it goes. And so I took that job on, and I was the wedding facilities coordinator for Marie and Peg. Strength, God has provided me strength because I have two children who are neurodivergent. They are both autistic, low services autistic, and they're very neurodivergent, but they're very neurodivergent in very divergent ways. So just like if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. If you've met one neurodivergent person, you've met one. And their neurodivergences don't always go along with each other. So that's taken some strength. Link has had depression and anxiety issues, and has had maybe 4 mental hygiene arrests, which are not fun. In February, he overdosed. This past February. I can say that he's doing really well right now, which I am incredibly grateful for. But having the strength to deal with all of that. And we also now have, for the last year and a half, another person living in our house, what I call my bonus child, who is a trans woman comes from Washington State and whose family is very unaccepting, and had been sleeping on couches and in cars across the country until she came to us. And so that's taken strength, because it's a 5th person in the house that's, 4 was enough. Purpose, God has provided purpose in my life. When I moved back in 2004, I was a stay-at-home mom and was kind of feeling like I wasn't using my intellect. And Mary Reese asked me if I would be willing to serve on the strategy team. And that, I think, really helped my mental health, because I could meet with adults during the day and have intelligent conversations and spiritual conversations. And God has provided me comfort. 5.5 years ago, my sister passed away from complications of liver cancer. And just in the beginning of October, my father passed away, 93 years, and lived a very full and wonderful life. And it's still hard. No matter how old someone is or how prepared you are, it's still hard. And God has provided me comfort in many different ways through many different people. And my work, with the church has been wonderful. My work in the theater has been equally wonderful. I am a proud union member of Local 858. I'm actually the vice president, which really means nothing, of our very tiny little union. But I love the theater. And even though this show for 2 weeks for Moulin Rouge, I've been doing laundry, which doesn't sound at all exciting or glamorous. It's making order out of chaos, which is another thing that I love doing. And honestly, Moulin Rouge, if anybody's seen it, knows it, would not be anything without fishnet stockings. And that has been my world for the last 2 weeks. So I'm really blessed. I do feel as though throughout my life, God has been providing me with places to live and connections and comfort when things don't go right. And I don't I think there's still some of that little girl in me who wonders if love is conditional, if God's love is conditional. And I know that there are a lot of other people who just read something the other day. Somebody commented about, it's hard for me to imagine that somebody would love me just because I exist. And so I think that's sometimes a common human issue. But I think I've come a ways from that. And I look back on my childhood, and I was very blessed. I was very blessed with my family and with the church that I grew up in. Even though it would seem very strange. I mean, and it does sometimes seem very strange to me now to go there, although the pastor that's there right now is more liberal. It still was a great basis for my life and a great basis to start from. And so I appreciate you all listening. And if you have any questions. No. Thanks. I was going to put another slide at the end, which would have been the truck with Moulin Rouge on the side. but I didn't.
Sally, thank you. Fascinating life so far. I'm curious what happened to the minister Paul, who was gay in Maryland, if he ever stayed or came out, or have you followed what happened to him?
I honestly don't know. I did try to Google him online yesterday just to see. And I really don't know. As far as I know, he stayed in that church and possibly retired. I do know that, so that church would do fundraisers where they would do a silent auction almost every year. And one of the prizes, like people really loved this, was to go to his house and have his partner cook a meal for them. And this was what they did. And people like fought tooth and nail to win that. So again, like I said, I think there were people that knew and didn't matter to them. And there were people who didn't know and just were oblivious, and people who knew and just didn't want to think about it. I wish him well. I hope that he did okay. I'm going to have to try to see if I can find him. I expect that he may no longer be on this plane. But I don't know that for sure.
Sally, I only want to say that I sat here nodding as though I couldn't, just hold my head up, because my own existence up until I was maybe 22 was yours. EUB Church, youth group, small church, but very meaningful. I'm amazed. And thank you so much for sharing all of this. And for the courage that you live out.
Oh, I do have one more slide. I'm sorry. I forgot. So this is, like I said, it kind of comes full circle. This is Lincoln, me and Ray, and this is in the upstairs kind of reception area in the new part of the Ono United Methodist Church. This was at the reception after my father's memorial service. And yeah, I mean, I grew up in like I said, so incredibly homogenous, and I grew up in the country. Ono is the closest town, and literally, I swear, it's like 162 people. And so it was Ono, and down the road was this hotel called Oh Yes. And we live, my family's home is kind of between the two down a road. And so I always said we lived at Oh Maybe. but out in the country, I mean, my niece and her husband bought my parents' house when they moved, and there's literally steer across the road from them. So it's very beautiful, and that's one of the things I'm so blessed that my niece and her husband bought that house. One, because my parents didn't have to get a rental unit for all their stuff before they had to move out. And two, because I get to go back there, and it is gorgeous. It's a lovely area, but it is very conservative. I don't think it's as conservative as it used to be. I think that's true everywhere. I'm on a Facebook group called Stand in Pride in the Northeast, which is people who are LGBT or people who are allies who can go on there and either be family or ask for family. And I see people from places in Pennsylvania where I'm like, wow, okay, there's gay people there. Wow. Just growing up there, it's kind of like, yes, okay, good. But both my children are trans, and so clearly acceptance is huge. Accepting of who a person is and how they are with all of their faults and foibles and joys and wonderful things about them. And I love my kids to the moon and back. And I'm glad that they could be here and nobody put up a fuss. And I have some very conservative relatives on my mother's side of the family. And they were there at my father's memorial service. We didn't talk to each other, but they were there. And in some ways, it's just a witness to show up with my kids, especially to show up with my kids to people who knew them when they were little. So it was a good experience though. And I don't get it to take a picture with them very often because they're often asleep. But yeah. Oh, Bob.
You're working on gathering things for the church history? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the Historian's Corner that's been in the newsletter has been all me. And we have a huge archival suite of rooms up on the 4th floor from all 3 churches. And so I'm very interested in history. History is like another one of my passions. And I love the history of this church because it's so old and it's so rich and there's so much that has happened. And so that's really sparked a thing. I'd love to go up into the archives. I think it would take at least a month to go through most of the stuff and try to organize it, especially the stuff from DUPC. The other 3 churches kind of each have their own room and they're a little more organized, but DUPC has this room that's just chock full of stuff and not super organized. So yeah, I love it. And then the last newsletter, if you saw the pictures from that calendar from 1914 or 1904, when the new building, the building we have now was dedicated after the fire, had different pictures. And that actually just dropped in my lap when I was putting the newsletter together. Someone came by and dropped it off at the front desk and said, this was probably a family member's, maybe a grandparent's, that and a couple of other things. And they just wanted to donate it to the church. So again, sometimes God provides in strange ways, but I was looking for something to put in the newsletter and I'm like, this is perfect. I don't have to write a lot. I can take pictures and there they are. And it just tells so much of a story. So yeah, we have a lot of artifacts and things and memories in this church. So hopefully we can get it organized. That's okay.
Okay, I'll be very brief. These last 3 weeks after listening to you and Pat and Carolyn Kahorty, I must say that I have been encouraged and inspired by what you've said, but your strength, and therefore extrapolating from that, I'm gaining confidence or renewed confidence or additional confidence in the strength of who we still are in this church. And then in addition to that, I have to say, I've sat here all 3 weeks completely amazed at how gigantically different my life experience has been from all of yours. So anyhow, it's just an interesting thing, but thank you for all that you've said and all that you've told us.
Thanks. It takes a village, and the village can't all be the same people, and homogenous can be great for a lot of things, but having a huge community with people who have just different life experiences, different backgrounds, lived in different places, that goes beyond just ethnicity or race or you know, anything like that is, I think, is huge, because it really does take a village. And I do have to go, and I apologize for having to leave so quickly, but I'm 15 minutes late for my call, but my supervisor is very nice, so. Thank you.